Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday. We have another similar show to yesterday. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We're going to bring you all the latest of what broke overnight in that war between Israel and Hamas. A lot going on there, a lot of developments on our side here as well. So we'll bring you all of that. Also, an update on just how wild some of the misinformation has been. I mean, you always have problems of things that are floating around, videos that are floating around that are fake. I don't think I've ever seen it as widespread as it has been in this particular conflict. So we'll give you some really extraordinary examples there. There's also a lot going on here too, though. We've got updates in terms of that Republican House Speaker fight. The update is sort of that there isn't really an update. There seems to be a complete stalemate. Kevin McCarthy throwing his hat back in the ring, and as of now, he may have more support than anybody. So very hard to say how that is all going to shake out. We also have RFK Jr. making it official yesterday. He is leaving the Democratic primary, running as an independent. Trump people coming at him, guns blazing, knives out.
Fun.
Very different tone towards him than they were taking just a few weeks ago, so we'll bring you that. Governor Newsom in California making some very interesting vetoes on psychedelics, on condoms, on insulin. Got some details for you there. We also, this just broke yesterday, apparently the current president was just interviewed in connection with the investigation into him having classified documents at his house. So we're just learning about that. And we've got a look at an interesting divide that has opened up over on MSNBC over Israel and Palestine, quite heated over there. So we'll bring you some of that as well. But we wanted to start with the latest on the ground unfolding in Israel and in Palestine.
Yeah, that's right. So in terms of the latest developments, we can begin starting to play some of this. We've compiled some footage of what happened in the last 24 hours. We're beginning here with Israeli strikes on Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. Israel saying they've struck nearly 1,000 targets. Some of this footage actually released, this one specifically, by the IDF themselves, which shows multiple targets being struck there across the area. This also comes as a heated battle continues inside of Israel. They still have not 100% taken charge of their border with the Gaza Strip. It's been, more than 48 hours now since the attack. It's the fourth day that this has all been going on so far, and it's still a horrific failure. What we're watching in front of us right now is Gaza civilians reacting to a strike. Here we now have, similar footage of Clarissa Ward from CNN, who had to take shelter in the middle of a rocket attack that was incoming. And then this is some really just heartbreaking footage of that Israeli music festival, which bore the brunt of the terrorist attack, in which multiple people were also taken hostage. So you can see all those cars abandoned, flashing back then to what presumably is a religious site inside of Gaza. And I think what this footage really displays is something we tried to highlight yesterday, which, this is as close you're probably going to get for most people to be able to see it with your own eyes, just how densely populated the area is. The third most densely populated area in the world. It's almost, I actually saw it akin to where we live right here, Krystal, in the DMV, but with 3 to 4 times the population. That's what it would appear to be like, if you were to make it analogous. And all of that also comes on the heels of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making an address in Hebrew and in English about his anticipated response. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it. Once the Jewish people were stateless. Once the Jewish people were defenseless. No longer. Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions. We will exact a price that will be remembered by them and Israel's other enemies for decades to come. The savage attacks that Hamas perpetrated against innocent Israelis are mind-boggling, slaughtering families in their homes, massacring hundreds of young people at an outdoor festival, kidnapping scores of women, children, and elderly, even Holocaust survivors. Hamas terrorists bound, burned, and executed children. They are savages. Hamas is ISIS. And just as the forces of civilizations united to defeat ISIS, the forces of civilization must support Israel in defeating Hamas.
It's Prime Minister Netanyahu making that statement shortly after a development on the Hamas side. What we're about to show you is a translation that was made on Al Jazeera by Hamas, in which they stated that for every airstrike, they would execute one of the hostages live and on camera. Let's take a listen to what they said.
Over the past few hours, we suffered as a result of the harm inflicted on our brothers and sisters at the hands of the fascist, barbarian, Zionist attacks targeting residential buildings. Therefore, we decided to put an end to this. From this moment on, we announce that any targeting of innocent civilians without warning will be met, regretfully to say, by executing one of the hostages in our custody. And we will be forced to broadcast this execution. We regret this decision, but we hold the Zionist enemy and their leadership the responsibility for this.
Horrific threat there, and it also comes on the heels of a major report yesterday from Washington. Let's put this up there. In a private phone call, actually, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden, he said, quote, "We have to go into Gaza." He said the President Biden, Israel does not have any choice but to unleash a ground operation in Gaza. Quote, "Directly, we have to go in," the Israelis said, according to 3 Israeli and U.S. sources that were briefed on the call. This is by a reporter here in Washington who is also Israeli. What his message signals, obviously, is that the country's response is going to look like in the days and the weeks to come will be, quote, "a long and difficult war." This also comes overnight, Krystal, as Israel actually mobilized another 60,000 active reservists and now has a total of 360,000 actually who have been called up. That basically touches the entire country of Israel. You know, almost anybody at this point would know somebody who has been called up for the situation. There's also been some developments in terms of Lebanon. There have been some Israeli strikes that have been observed over the Lebanese border, presumably on Hezbollah targets. We haven't seen yet any major escalation yet from Hezbollah or official declaration of war. That would, of course, touch on what we talked about yesterday, the two-front nightmare scenario for Israeli war planners. But clearly, we're still in the 4th day, and we're almost in a holding pattern. And it's a terrible holding pattern because we know whatever is to be unleashed, it is going to be absolute hell for a lot of people. What really we are presumably seeing is that Israel believes that it needs to get total control of all of its border before any ground operation can be launched inside of Gaza. That hopefully, at least there have been some limited diplomatic communications. The Qatari government, which does have an official relationship with Hamas, has been in active talks in order to try and release some of the hostages, or at least some of the American hostages. They're the main go-between right now with the West. But that's really where the military situation stands right now. You know, like we've had strikes, we have border clearings and all of that, and then of course we now have Hamas saying we'll execute people live on camera. So the stakes really couldn't be higher than they are right now.
Yeah, we're also continue to learn more horrific details about that Hamas attack on Israeli citizens. Ugh. There were 108 bodies found at a single kibbutz, including peace activists. So it just shows you, I mean, it's horrible. There's just no other way to say it. And my heart breaks for the people who have been affected by this incredible tragedy. And now we see with these roughly 1,000 Israeli strikes inside of Gaza, they have not launched the ground invasion yet. All signs are pointing in that direction with the massing of troops, with that Axios report that Saagar was pointing to saying, listen, we've got to go in. And so at the same time as you have obviously horror and outrage at the war crimes committed by Hamas, including now the use of civilians as hostage pawns in all of this, you also see growing concern from the international community about war crimes from the Israeli side, including their announcement that they're going to have a complete siege, which announced effectively to collective punishment of all 2.2 million people within Gaza. Remember, as Saagar was saying, Gaza is densely populated, and remember, all of the people there are not Hamas. Half of the population are children. The median age in the Gaza Strip is 19 years old. You have many people who are living in poverty. Already, the water is barely drinkable. There are efforts in place right now to try to establish some sort of humanitarian corridor so that people, the many thousands of people who have already been injured in Israeli strikes, can seek effective medical care, because even before this now complete siege situation where they're denying food, water, electricity, fuel, etc., already they really suffered and struggled to have sufficient medical supplies in the Gaza Strip. That, of course, now only exacerbated, and with the death toll rising into over 500, including children, including journalists, this has become an urgent need. Let me just read you a little bit of what the UN human rights chief said about all of this in terms of the full siege. They said on October 9th, the Israeli authorities ordered a full siege of Gaza, shutting off electricity, water, food, and fuel supplies. This risks seriously compounding the already dire human rights and humanitarian situation in Gaza, including the capacity of medical facilities to operate, especially in light of increasing numbers of injured. The imposition of sieges that endanger the lives of civilians by depriving them of goods essential for their survival is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Any restrictions on the movement of people and goods to implement a siege must be justified by military necessity or may otherwise amount to collective punishment. So it's a horrific situation, and war crimes already being committed by both sides, beginning with Hamas with the horror that they inflicted on Israeli citizens.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the nightmares right now is that there has not been any real development from the Egyptian side. I often feel like the Egyptians don't really get much of the criticism that they deserve here as well. They're participating in the blockade on Gaza, and the truth is that they don't want the Palestinians
They
to
don't
come
want the
into.
refugees.
Yeah, they don't want to deal with what the Jordanians have had to deal. None of the Saudis, none of the Qataris. Multiple people contacted me yesterday. They're like, "Hey, why don't they just take them?" I'm like, "Well, they hate them too. Unfortunately, that's the truth." If we were to establish a humanitarian corridor out of Gaza with the territory that they have with Egypt, there would be a credible case there. You could basically do what the U.S. military did, in I think it was the first or the second battle of Fallujah, where they're like, look, everybody who doesn't want to fight, you should leave. And anybody who stays, you're going to be considered an active combatant. Because at the very least, in that scenario, you give people a chance to go. Otherwise, it is impossible. I'm not even going to say virtually impossible. It is impossible then to conduct military operations inside of Gaza, both from an airstrike level and at a ground level, without massive collateral damage. And, that is one of those where I keep actually thinking about what Trita Parsi said on our show yesterday, which was very, very prescient. He said, remember, after 9/11, the world was with America. Our response to 9/11 and eventually came to bite us such that we eventually created more international terrorism. Our response ended up killing, untold numbers of more people than were even affected in the overall attack. And on net, we came out far worse from our response than we did for the attack. A lot of the world right now is with Israel. A lot of the world is horrified by the attacks. Even with the airstrikes and all of that, their death toll in Israel appears. We don't know yet. From the official sources, at least 900 or so Israelis were killed in the operation. And there's, I think, about 700 or 800 that have been killed on the Palestinian side. Many of those actually are civilians. We'll never really know what the actual breakdown is. But I think he is absolutely correct to flag for them. He's like, look, you kill 10,000, you kill 100,000, that's not actually all that crazy when you think about how densely populated it is if these people have nowhere to go. And that's why I think anybody who has and I understand there's a lot of bloodthirst, and very obviously from a lot of sides, but there's not everybody inside of these cities. It's just like Fallujah. Not everybody inside of Fallujah was a terrorist. A lot of these people were very well-meaning Iraqis. They wanted nothing to do with this nonsense. And they saw their homes razed to the ground. Same thing in Mosul. ISIS took over Mosul. Does that mean everybody in Mosul was, a terrorist? No, they were the ones who actually suffered the most. They hated them. And so I think it's just a very, very unfortunate situation. And I don't think I see a way around it, though, because Hamas is in some cases also, they have a military necessity to try to keep as many civilians as possible. They're telling many of those people, no, don't leave. Like, that's Israeli propaganda. In some cases, they might even prevent them from leaving because they want to be able to use them as human shields. And these people are pawns. They're completely caught in the middle. So I don't
Well, and they
know.
also have nowhere to go.
Yeah, well, exactly. Right now, they have nowhere to go.
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu made this statement of like, leave now.
Right.
They can't. They literally can't. I mean, there's been a blockade on Gaza for 16 years now before this complete siege situation with their high-tech fencing and all of this. That was another piece that came out, which is really wild to contemplate and kind of terrifying. Israel spent millions and millions of dollars building this high-tech fence with all sorts of surveillance apparatus around Gaza. They thought that was sufficient. And because of the extremists who are in Netanyahu's governing coalition, they redirected many IDF soldiers to the West Bank to help protect the Jewish settlers there and the illegal settlements in and around the West Bank. And so there was very little troop presence there. And then all of their multi-million-dollar, super high-tech equipment was basically disabled by like $100 off-the-shelf drones. That Hamas was, and that was their first thing that they did before the rockets, before the invasion. They disabled all of this high-tech surveillance equipment, again, using this just like, $100 drones up against this multi-million-dollar fence. And so it shows you, I mean, on the one hand, it's unbelievable. If you think of I feel uncomfortable even using the word war because on the one hand, you have this, effectively non-state actor. On the other hand, you have one of the most well-funded, powerful militaries in the entire world. Like, there's no doubt it's the asymmetry of the situation. And on the other hand, because of technology, you see how, and this is something Trita Parsi talked about yesterday too, there is a bit of leveling of the playing field in terms of the carnage that these sides are able to afflict on each other.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting lesson. A lot of people are saying that Hamas is learning from ways that the Ukrainians are actually fighting against Russia. But that's really one where the U.S. military also found that out in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
we had
that's true.
billions and billions of dollars, and then all it took was Iranians to give this one specific IED technology which could penetrate our Humvees, and 500 Americans were killed, thousands were mutilated. And then it took us billions and billions and billions of dollars to build like this one thing which would technically not, inflict the same amount of damage. There's the asymmetry and the part of the quote-unquote untechnologically advanced has probably never been at a better position because they just have so many vectors. I mean, even with the music festival, who could have predicted they're literally going to, is it paraglide or hand glide, into the facility? And how do you protect against that? Other than having like literal physical troops on the ground, you can't technology your way out of this. And that's something, though, that Israel has really pioneered over time. And just to underscore how Israeli society is preparing for the next couple of days, here was a report from Israel where they're telling citizens, you need to shelter in place and have enough supplies to ride out the next 72 hours because we don't know what's going to happen. Here's what he said.
And so I think what the IDF Home Front decided to do is use this opportunity to remind all Israelis that according to their regular guidelines, we should all be prepared with, all Israelis should be prepared with and stock up in their shelters. I think that was the intention, and that also explains, I think, perhaps the clarification that they issued following that. But already, Israelis didn't wait for the clarification, and many of them have taken to the supermarkets at this late hour of the day, only simply because of that scary statement.
So there we're actually trying to clean it up, saying, look, it's not imminent, but you just need to make sure that you have it. It does come, though, at a time when rockets continue to rain down, on Israel. Even literally right as we speak, there's a rocket attack going on with Tel Aviv. Iron Dome is being tested probably to its absolute limit.
Yeah.
And it does show you, it's like people inside of Israel, I think, not only does everybody, there. It's a country of only 10 million people. If you think about just Israeli citizens, if 360,000 people are called up, everybody has a son, a brother, an uncle, or somebody who is involved in the military operation in somehow, or at the very least has been called, to their post. But they also, are very much feeling as if they are at risk, especially with all of the violence that's happening, continuing in the South. And I just think it's still so, obviously we're going to continue to develop the war, but I don't know how Israel will never be the same after this, just because so much of their adherence to the security state, their trust in the system, the unbelievable amount of power that they give to the government and all that was, you're going to keep us safe, you're going to make sure this stuff never happens again. But it's a massive failure. I mean, massive. We saw the border fail. We saw that they, I said this yesterday, Snowden made this point. Netanyahu invests all this money in Pegasus 1 and in Pegasus 2. They say they can tap every phone in Gaza. They say they've got intel agents all over the ground. There's even a joke that the Israeli people always make about 1 in 10 Hamas guys is an Israeli informant. It's like, well, what happened? And then same with Iran. They have all of these vaunted, secure, we snuck a Mossad guy into their nuclear reactor and we blew it up from the inside and all of this. Well, if Iran maintains all these ties, how did you miss it?
Right.
Same with Lebanon. So look, we're never going to get over that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big, big question that remains.
There continue to be a lot of questions about that Wall Street Journal report too that we covered with Dr. Parsi yesterday, alleging per Hamas and Hezbollah that Iran was directly involved. Now, do we know that Iran backs Hamas and helps supply? Absolutely. There's no question about that. But were they directly involved in the planning of these attacks? That's the question. And there's been a lot of cold water poured on that report from the Wall Street Journal, both from the U.S. side and from the Israeli side, which is really interesting. This is a good place to actually move on to some allegations of just how insane the intelligence failure here was, because Saagar's absolutely right. I mean, the whole ability of Israelis to live and govern in the manner that they were was predicated on a high level of confidence in the intelligence and in the military. And that has been shaken to its core. So that's why when you see these reports of you got to get 3 days worth of food, there's just no confidence anymore that the government is going to be able to keep them safe. And this report is another real shocking development, if true. Put this up on the screen. Egypt is saying, hey, we warned Netanyahu directly 10 days ago that, quote, something big was going to happen. And, it wasn't extremely specific, but in one of the warnings, Egypt's intelligence minister, General Abbas Kamel, personally called Netanyahu 10 days before this attack, said that Gazans were likely to do something unusual, a terrible operation. And according to these sources in Egypt, Netanyahu sort of brushed them off, and they were fairly stunned that the warnings were not taken more seriously. As we mentioned a few times, they were much more focused on these skirmishes between, residents of the West Bank and Jewish Israeli settlers and the violence that was taking place there. Many of the troops had been redirected there. They said they felt like that was where the real risk was. They thought Gaza was fine, that they were placated. They were thinking of giving them a few more thousand work permits, and they thought that would be sufficient to keep things quiet over there. So at least according to this, which I will say, Netanyahu is calling complete fake news and completely denying out of hand. But if this is accurate, I mean, this is yet another stunning failure that you actually had information directly from Egypt saying something big is coming, and you literally did nothing.
Yeah, I think it's stunning too, because they specifically say that Netanyahu told this is one of those where, look, it's either true or it's not. And it actually should be pretty easy to verify. I personally have a decent amount of trust. The Israeli media, as you can see here, is being incredibly critical of Netanyahu. Both the Times of Israel and Haaretz are out for blood in their response. And they're like, look, we have here an Egyptian official who tells us directly that the intelligence minister, who they name personally, called you 10 days before the attack. And the Egyptian officials say that Netanyahu's response, quote, told the minister the military was submerged in troubles in the West Bank directly in his response. in that phone call 10 days before. Records are kept. They have the phone call or not. Also, as we all found out during the Trump era, there are contemporary transcripts that are kept on all of this. So if you're in the Israeli government, you should let somebody know. Let one of these great journalists in the Times of Israel, Haaretz, know if that is true or not. What they also point out, though, is that the Egyptian intelligence, one of the reasons why they would, of course, have great knowledge is not only do they participate in the blockade, they control one of those major land crossings that Gazans, ostensibly might be able to use. And there's always been allegations that one of the major pathways of weapons into Gaza is through these, Egyptian tunnels, of which the Egyptian government either controls or allows or disallows based upon their whims and whatever's good for their domestic situation. So they would have great visibility into what is going on inside of Gaza. And this is obviously, one of the most authoritarian countries on earth, currently Egypt, under military dictatorship. So I personally would have taken this very seriously if something like this were to emerge. So Israelis also should be outraged at this. It also is interesting in terms of the response to the attack. The chief military spokesperson, he said that the army does owe the public an explanation, but he said now is not the time. Quote, first we fight, then we investigate. Yeah, true. However, it's one of those where a lot of questions still need to be asked here about how this came to be. And as I alluded to, Haaretz, as we characterized yesterday kind of as the New York Times of Israel, continues to highlight some of the major failures of the Netanyahu government that could have led to this. One of these, let's put this up there on the screen, which they put out yesterday. Quote, actual quote from Netanyahu openly in March of 2019. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas, Netanyahu told the Likud Party Knesset members in March of 2019. This is part of our strategy. And this was actually from a column that was written by an Israeli, Gidi Weitz, and he just said, another concept implodes. Israel can't be managed by a criminal defendant. Quote, a direct line now runs between judicial overhaul and the Gaza war. Netanyahu should humiliate Begin and go. We cannot expect introspection from him. The future inquiry must investigate how much time the prime minister has devoted to reform and how much listening to the military leadership. And they specifically highlight his political strategy about how to come back to power, tearing the country apart by basically, he really is a lot like Trump, except it's smarter in my opinion. He basically is in it for survival, willing to do whatever it takes to remain in power, doesn't care about democratic norms or any of this, will ally himself with anyone as long as they are on his side. And the political expediency and all of that ripped the country apart, not only domestically, but their intelligence community. And it's within that vacuum of chaos that this attack happened. And now Israel finds itself in a battle that they have not faced in 50 years as a country.
And that's the immediate context, which is really important to understand, that because Netanyahu was in trouble for his own allegations of corruption, which he denies, that was the genesis of this fight to basically kneecap the independent judiciary and Supreme Court. And that's what created this mass conflict and these protests. And that's what, and also that's part of why his quest for power is part of why he ended up forming this coalition with these effectively like racist psychopaths on the hard extreme part of the Israeli spectrum. And they're the ones who were so intent on pushing forward with the illegal settlements and protecting these Jewish settlers over and above making sure that the Gaza border was safe. So that part is really important in terms of the micro context. But that quote that we just had up there really speaks to the macro context here too. As we said before, in the West, we sort of maintain this fiction because we're far away and we can do it, that, they're, two-state solution and there's a path to that and that's what we need to be pushing for. That's not what Netanyahu wants or believes. He is very clear in this statement that he wants to thwart the establishment of any Palestinian state. And the way to do that, in his view, and this goes back also to the founding of Hamas, which was bolstered by Israelis in order to be a check on the PLO, his view continued to be, hey, if you want to thwart the establishment, what you should do is build up Hamas. Why? Because it's going to be very unsympathetic if you have these psychopathic terrorists who are the face of the Palestinian liberation movement. It's going to be very unsympathetic, the idea of giving them any sort of a state. So let's build them up. That's the way to go in order to make sure that we, are able to sort of short circuit any talk of a real peace solution, two-state solution, or otherwise. And that's been the direction that, Israeli public policy has been going in. And at this point, it's really not even just Netanyahu and the hard right. This has become the status quo in Israel, where it's like, we think that the IDF is going to keep us safe. We think the intelligence is so great that we're not going to suffer any real threats. We can just sort of maintain the occupation and the blockade status quo and put the Palestinians out of our mind. And globally, this was the position adopted by the U.S. internationally of, okay, under Trump, we're going to do the Abraham Accords and just pretend like the Palestinians don't exist. Under Biden, we're going to do this new Saudi Arabia deal, which is very similar, and just pretend the Palestinians don't exist. That was the idea of how are they going to build this quote unquote new Middle East. And I think it really comes through in this quote, how much of a failure that policy is. And the fact that you are never going to have, I don't care how many millions, billions, trillions of dollars you spend on your military and the high tech and the surveillance and all of that. If you really care about safety and security for your own citizens, for Israeli citizens, there will be no real safety and security until you have some sort of a just and sustainable resolution to the apartheid conditions that Palestinians are currently living under, both in the West Bank and in Gaza.
Yeah, well, I hope that we eventually get to that, in this situation. But unfortunately, I just think there's going to be so much death and destruction in the middle. And
it's already happening.
It is already happening, and as I said, it really can only get so much worse from here, especially if we see a full-blown war breakout. And we don't even see any attempts really at diplomacy or any of that, which I understand, in some cases on the Israeli and even on the Palestinian side, they both feel like they're so all in at this point that they've got nothing else.
The amount of dehumanization that has happened here, is just, just.
I mean, you heard the Hamas guy. He's like, he's like, it's unfortunate, but we're going to cut these people's heads off, on camera. And
they had no qualms about murdering any Israeli they saw.
Yeah, exactly. They're like shooting up little grandmas and even children. And then same thing, I see the same. I see videos of little tiny kids and babies getting pulled out of Gaza wreckage, and you're like, man, this is just. It's so horrific.
Yeah,
really
absolutely. Attacks on markets, attacks on mosques, razing apartment buildings to the ground. Again, half of Gaza, children, median age of 19 years old. These babies are not Hamas, they are not terrorists, and they deserve life as much as these precious Israeli babies do as well.
All right, let's move on. Misinformation. This was very important. As you could see, it's been trepidatious and difficult for us to continue to report on this just because we're not in Israel. I only know one person who actually is a reporter, Trey Yingst. I shouted him out yesterday. But it's been incredibly difficult to sort through what is true and what is not. It's very reminiscent of the early days of the Ukraine war. Oh, Snake Island, the ghost of Kyiv. What else am I missing in terms of some of the hoaxes that were perpetrated at that time? And we have several examples, actually, that we can show you that one user actually did a fantastic job of highlighting. So let's start with the first one. Let's put this up there. So this one, for example, this is a video that was circulating of a tower block in Gaza being hit. It was being circulated as if it had just happened. Turns out it was actually live during a BBC Arabic broadcast in May of 2021. And it was circulated widely all across as some sort of response by Israel. Yeah, it was a response by Israel, but it was a response in the last war in May of 2021. Move on to the next one, please. This one also is shows you the exact same thing. The video of a house in Gaza being destroyed by a strike, quote, is genuine, but it's from May of 2023, not as a result of the current escalation. So the same problem where we're taking old videos, and in some cases not even that old, but it just happened, and then we're passing them around as if it had just occurred. Here's the next one. This one is going around, has been shared a bunch of times, shows Israeli police, and it was actually special forces outside of a house, as you could see from their uniforms, not Hamas militants. This was a video that was being passed around of people allegedly going door to door when it was actually police and special forces who were trying to go door to door to make sure everybody in the community is safe. And then the next one. This, again, does not show Hamas shooting down 2 Israeli helicopters because it's from a freaking video game called Arma 3.
Oh my God.
I think that one might be the absolute worst. And I believe we have one more that we can show, which is, quote, a actual tweet which was going around saying, quote, breaking, Israel has authorized a tactical nuclear strike on the Gaza Strip. Israel is advised to leave border settlement areas to avoid nuclear fallout.
God.
And of course, that's not even true. Also, just so everyone knows, Israel's never even acknowledged having a nuclear weapon, even though they definitely do. And it's one of those where, you know, in the heat of battle, as we will all remember with Ukraine, the ghost of Kyiv, Snake Island, many other of these stories that were passed around, we have no idea. You know, even yesterday, I said, based on a report that I saw of a firsthand account from one source, that there had been mass rape at the music festival. It turns out that is only from one single source, and that this has not been verified, and that the firsthand nature of it has now been questioned. I have no idea whether it occurred or not. I felt, though, that I should say that here, because that's obviously an incendiary and horrible claim. I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put it past people who are going to, massacre people and shoot them and take them hostage, who God knows what happens. It wouldn't be out of character, to see in a war, especially with ISIS in the past and Islamic terrorists. But I'm not going to say it until it's been 100% verified. So, I could say that here. But that just goes to show you we're working so hard here, Krystal, to try and give people the best of information. And again, we see crazy instances. This is the craziest, one of the craziest ones. Put this up there, please. Where this guy puts out a tweet, says, alleged footage of Hamas keeping children in cages. Why? What purpose does this serve? Are they Israeli hostages? Correction. They were Palestinian children that were being held in cages by Israeli law enforcement and army officials. Yeah, interesting. That one immediately got deleted. None of this, by the way, is to, bash whatever regime or, other side. It's just to show you, trying to sort through all of this, you have to be very, very careful with what you see. It has to be verified, multiple sources. You never know what's being out there. Things can be deceptively edited. This is just Twitter. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, all this is rife with the same level. And you and I are not calling for misinformation, we're not calling for mass censorship or any of that. We are only pleading with you to do what we have to do, which is be very careful. Don't believe everything that you see. Yeah. Try to make sure it's been verified multiple times. Definitely don't just take something credulous because your friend posted it. Images, like the kids' image is so easy to be passed around. The other one that we saw, like we said, the special forces, you can make something, guys going door to door, something that was actually a heroic act into a nefarious act. So just calm, wait. We don't know. The stories themselves don't need to be embellished. They're bad enough, the true ones. You don't need to be pumping out, crap.
Well, and I mean, I do think some of these people that are sharing this stuff, especially the people that even after they get called out on it, they don't take it down.
That's
horrible. I think it is
Yeah.
actually malevolent in certain cases where they just want the clicks, they just want the clout.
Yeah.
I mean, the people who making video game graphics and sharing that crap, you can't tell me they don't know what they're doing. Come on. Ted Cruz shared that kids in cages bullshit. This was days after it had already been widely debunked and hey, that's actually Palestinian children and that's not actually from now and this is totally wildly inaccurate. He still shared it, I think, yesterday. So did he know about it or not? I have no idea, but especially be careful when it fits whatever your biased, pre-existing bias is. When it fits your storyline a little bit too closely, really take a step back and really think about where is this coming from, who's verified it, has it been double verified, etc. Here's another one. This was Jamie Lee Curtis who put this up on the screen, who was making a post that she thought was in support of Israel. And she just puts this caption, this is on Instagram, terror from the skies with the Israeli flag. That's a picture of Palestinian kids in Gaza who are afraid of bombing that is coming from the Israelis in retaliation. So she's actually accidentally making the exact opposite point of what she thinks she's making here, which is, in defense of Israeli children. Instead, she's showing the horror that Palestinian children are also being subjected to right now. I have to say, Saagar, we had a little debate before about community notes on Twitter.
Yes.
I have come to really appreciate community notes because
it's a thing of their own making. That's they only need community notes because of the vast like Ian Miles Chong, all right, who I'm going to call it. This guy has posted multiple things.
So
which
many
are completely
things.
wrong. He's only boosted in the algorithm because he frequently is a reply guy to Elon. By the way, he's never even been to America. I don't know if anybody knows that. He's from Malaysia. He's constantly posting about
I know as little about
American
Ian Miles
politics.
Chong as possible.
I wish I knew less. I'm only just like, why is this guy's feed, constantly in my feed posting all of these videos?
Yeah.
And, it's like some of them are complete BS. So it's made me be like, okay, now I can't trust anything for this person. But that's why the reason community notes end up being needed is because we have vast amounts of these crazy verified accounts like X Monitor or whatever, which just post stuff and it has the blue check and people take it credulously and they amass hundreds of thousands of followers. And then 2-3 hours later, you have a note. But honestly, at that point, the damage is done. No, I'm not saying that they are just as bad. In many cases, they're probably just as bad as the mainstream media. I'm just saying, like, in terms of the problem surrounding this and all that, I think that is just like a Band-Aid on a much worse issue.
Well, Elon actively boosted especially one account. Like,
War Monitor.
War Monitor.
Yeah,
Go follow them. They're great with updates. And then people start, first of all, they get things wrong all the time.
Yeah.
Second of all, people are posting all of these like brazenly anti-Semitic comments from them. Like, these are the people you want folks to really follow. He deleted the tweet.
Yeah, War Monitor is a very, I will say, I do follow him because every once in a while he has stuff that it surfaces, but he is one of those people, or she, I don't know who it is actually, because it's an anonymous account, but he's like one of those people who's like the Zionist regime, and he literally refers to dead Palestinian soldiers as martyrs. Just like, come on, man. It's like, what are we?
Maybe not your neutral news source.
What are we doing here? Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe because I've covered several wars and conflicts in the past, it's just a given. If you went through Syria, if you went through Afghanistan, if you went through Ukraine, that's just what in the last like 10 years.
Yeah.
You should have a very, very thick skin and be incredibly skeptical about a lot of the stuff that you sift through. But I do think that there are a lot of people who are coming online in this like obsession area where I've noticed this really with Ukraine, where people who have never been to Ukraine, they probably never even heard of Ukraine before Ukraine, can tell you every unit where they are placed. They're like follow it. It's like a video game for a lot of people. I actually met some of these people. It's honestly scary. In most cases, they're losers and they don't really have a lot going else in their life. And it's like they live vicariously through the conflict by going on our combat footage or whatever on Reddit, or going on Telegram now that LiveLeak is dead, RIP, to those who used to also frequent the site. And they like live through GoPro footage and a lot of this other stuff. And that's actually what I think feeds the most of this misinformation, because it's like a dopamine hit for people who like to play Call of Duty, which is why it's gross for all of us, because these are real people, real people's lives, and it has a real impact in terms of the public's understanding of the situation.
Let me also say, I mean, this is like just the beginning of this, because these are like,
correct.
Video game footage that's easily disproven, or you can go back and look and be like, actually, this is BBC footage from last year, not this current conflict, et cetera, which some of the things that were being shared as being in the current conflict, which were like, no, that was actually a few months ago, also goes to show you the level of continued violence that is going on here that, people just don't really pay attention to typically. But, this is before we really have transitioned into the era of AI and deepfakes and what could be generated there. And people are really going to need to be on their guard. And the number one thing you can do to inoculate yourself is to really, really question anything that fits too neatly into your own bias. Be aware of what your narrative is, be aware of what your bias is, and really question yourself when it's video, footage, kids in cages that happen to fit your particular political ideology, because that's where people really get caught. And there are really malicious actors out there who just want the clicks and they really don't care whether it's accurate or inaccurate or whatever. And even if they end up deleting it, the fact they posted it and got, thousands of retweets and all this engagement and whatever, and got the bump in their account from it, and then they go and delete it, like, that's all they need to help to build their clout. So there are a lot of very shady actors out there, and don't find yourself caught up in one. And it's sad because it makes us actually have to rely more on the mainstream sources.
Yes.
because it's so difficult to verify or trust anything that is being posted on Twitter in particular or other platforms at this point, because there is so much. And don't even get me started on the freaking headlines being gone from the news articles, which is such a pain in the ass.
That is, yeah, there's so many things that we could say. We just wanted to make sure that everybody kept that in mind, especially on what is likely to be a pretty crazy 48 hours to come. Let's move on to the speaker's race. We brought you the news yesterday. The speaker's race has been dramatically impacted and could be accelerated by the Israel conflict. They want to push as much aid to Israel as possible. They can't do anything in the House of Representatives until they elect a speaker. Now, though, there doesn't yet seem to be any acceleration in the development. We brought you the news that there would be a meeting last night, and there was one, but it doesn't appear that anything actually happened. Let's put this up there on the screen. Quote, the GOP holds an emotional meeting on the next speaker, fails to unite on one. They had multiple people come up and speak. They said, one member called it, quote, a therapy session. Others specifically called out the 8 people. I believe chicken shit was the most polite thing that was said about all of them, about the people who actually kicked out Kevin McCarthy. However, there have been major cracks that have now unfolded. 2 members say they will only vote for Kevin McCarthy. They're like, no, I won't vote for anybody else. I will only vote for Kevin. Some have united behind Congressman Jim Jordan, who is pictured there, who is openly declared and actually has a decent amount of endorsements. Some have united around Steve Scalise, the former number 2, who has also declared his candidate for speakership. Nobody has got 217 votes, which is what you actually need to become speaker. So this has spurred a new draft McCarthy movement back to his old job, which he said yesterday. He also has the backing of Newt Gingrich. Let's take a listen to that.
96% of the Republicans voted for McCarthy. 4% voted against him. From my position as a longtime Republican activist, they're traitors. All 8 of them should, in fact, be primaried. They should all be driven out of public life. What they did was to go to the other team to cause total chaos. We ought to be focusing on Biden. We ought to be focusing on the economy.
This is about a moment in time. This is about what America's going to do. Could you imagine if we were sitting here and we listened further to a Gates and Mace, that we were in a shutdown? That as we asked our 30,000 men and women in the military in the Middle East to defend us without being paid? That the question around the world of what was happening here today, that's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is.
I can lead in any position it is. Doesn't sound like he's bowing out like he did just 48 hours ago. What a crazy last 11 days we're talking about. It feels like everything has been, the world has been accelerating since Dianne Feinstein died. It's only 11 days
She
ago.
triggered like a hole in the matrix or something I don't know.
Maybe
I think it might have been Trump that triggered
probably
that
had to
initial
happen.
hole. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Trump was really the one who actually activated the code. Matt Gaetz, though, said, put this up there on the screen. He was like, yeah, a lot of people does not equal 218. Math is real. It's time to move forward. After one of his colleagues, Congressman Mike Lawler, said that there are a lot of people who believe Kevin McCarthy is the right person to lead us. So I don't really know what exactly is going to happen. We don't seem any closer to 217. We also know whenever it comes to the actual GOP, there will be another meeting tonight where allegedly they were going to have some sort of ballot process. One congressman who did come out of the meeting said that they wanted to resolve everything, either tonight or ongoing behind closed doors, before that they eventually were able to unite to 218 and then bring it to a vote on the floor in the House. Currently, the speaker election is still scheduled for Wednesday. There is supposed to be a vote on Wednesday for this, but the current indication in Washington does not appear that it will be successful or that will be resolved. Could be wrong. Something crazy could happen tonight, but I mean, I don't personally see a way that could happen.
I think you've got too many people who are too hard dug in. I mean, you got a few folks who are saying, I will only vote for McCarthy. You've got other people, obviously, in the Gates coalition who will 100% never vote for McCarthy. Steve Scalise out there kind of being like, hey, I'll be the middle ground. My personal guess at this point, yesterday, we brought you the reporting that they're trying to test the limits of what the interim speaker pro tem, what's his name, McHenry, who's a close
Patrick
McCarthy ally. They're trying to test the limits of what he can do as Speaker pro tem. And, you know, up to this point, the conventional wisdom has been exactly what we've been saying. You can't do anything until you elect a new speaker. Well, now they're starting to say, well, maybe you can, and we need to get this Israel aid done, and we want to do this pro-Israel resolution and whatever. It would not shock me if they just are unable to come to any sort of a resolution, and he just ends up being this, like, interim speaker for quite a while. While, you know, I could even go until the next election. It's hard for me to see how this gets resolved. And usually, if there is a path of inaction in Washington is available, that is the path that will be taken.
Absolutely.
Like, the status quo doesn't require anything hard, doesn't require any negotiations, doesn't require anyone to do anything. Just continue on this course. That's how you end up with all of these, like, continuing resolutions and no real budget process, and all of that is just like, this is the default. So it wouldn't shock me if they just, like, figure out a way to kind of maintain this weird in-between status quo. I think that's certainly a possibility at this point. And the other piece, Saagar, that we were talking about some yesterday is, you know, now you've got this desire for additional Israel aid, which the Republican caucus is, as far as I know, like 100% united
100%,
behind,
yeah.
And very adamant in favor of. And then you still have the Ukraine aid that many Republicans and basically I think all of the Democrats want to see passed, and Joe Biden wants to see passed. The new idea is, hey, we'll put these two things together, and that's how we'll get it through. And it would not surprise me whatsoever if that's what ends up happening.
Wouldn't surprise me either. The only benefit that we might have is that Israel aid is actually on autopilot. The last time that it was passed, they have a $3 billion per year appropriation that doesn't have to be reauthorized every year. As I understand it, that has not been fully drawn down or whatever from that pile. So they may not even need more aid to be appropriated, and they probably will still give it just as a symbolic method. Just saying, though, it's not like it is a scenario in which they don't have to pass any new Israel aid. And if you don't have to do that, then you don't have to pass any more Ukraine aid.
But you know they want more Israel aid.
Of course they want more Israel aid. We'll see how it works out. I'd be very interested, because it would be, I think, very difficult for many, even anti-Ukraine aid Republicans to vote against that if they tie it together. At the same time, they could be like, no, we're not going to allow you procedurally to tie that together. And then also some Democrats could vote against it. It might split that coalition, although who the hell knows. So procedurally, we're not there yet.
Many Democrats who would vote against Israel aid. There's like maybe like 3.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
it's like Rashida Tlaib, maybe Ilhan Omar, I don't think, I don't know. It's hard to say, but it wouldn't be a lot.
Okay. All right.
So yesterday, RFK Jr. making it official, moving out of the Democratic primary and into a run as an independent. He gave a big speech in Philadelphia. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that.
At hotels and malls on the street, and they remind me that this country is ready for a history-making change. They are ready to reclaim their freedom, their independence. And
I saw that and I thought, is that an assassin?
And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to declare myself an independent candidate.
So there you go. As I said, making it official. Independent run. Doesn't look like he's going to affiliate with any party, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, also not like the Libertarians or another third party, fully independent. Difficult to get ballot access, et cetera, but he does have a good amount of money behind him. So if anyone could pull off a lot of ballot access in a number of states, I think he would be, you know, a person who would be well positioned to do it. He's also got a decent level of support and certainly a significant following online and elsewhere. One thing that has been very funny about this, though, is up to this moment, a lot of Republicans, especially a lot of MAGA Republicans, loving RFK Jr. You know, they wanted to hear everything he had to say about vaccines, about Fauci. His latest book was about, you know, anti-Dr. Fauci. Wanted to hear everything he had to say about, like, online censorship and misinformation. Wanted to hear everything he had to say about Ukraine. Now they're feeling a little bit different now that he's running as an independent and not against Joe Biden, because there are some indication, we'll get into this in a minute, that he may take more votes from Donald Trump than he does from Joe Biden. So put this reaction up on the screen. This is from GOP chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. She says RFK Jr. cannot hide from his record of endorsing Hillary, supporting the Green New Deal, fighting against the Keystone Pipeline, and praising AOC's tax hikes. He is your typical liberal, and voters will not be fooled. And this is an official RNC statement in the same direction. Actually put up on the screen I think it's the last element we have in this block, which shows you the way that Trump was talking about him very recently as well. He was praising RFK as a common sense guy. He said this was on a radio show. He's a common sense guy, so am I. So whether you're conservative or liberal, common sense is common sense. A lot of what I run on is common sense. He's doing really well. I saw a poll, he's at 22. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Doing very well. So obviously a bit of a shift in the vibes towards RFK Jr. coming from the right at this point, Saagar.
Big time shift that we are seeing there. And yeah, I mean, look, I said it last time. I think independent is going to be a tough gig. As you said, if anybody could do it, it definitely could be him. But getting on the state and getting on the ballot in all 50 states is absolutely no joke. Otherwise, you have to rely on write-in. At this point, I mean, RFK Jr. has said himself, I take more votes than I do from Trump. He has also had that campaign insider that leaked to media. We're going to fuck Trump is what they said. So, I mean, maybe that's their goal, or maybe they just don't care because he wants to be able to get his message out there. Honestly, I think that probably is it. I think that he has achieved, this is the pinnacle, really, of any of his public profile that he's ever had. He's sold millions of the real Anthony Fauci. He's been able to be on every podcast that would have him. He's become, I wouldn't say he's a household name yet, but I mean, he's definitely dramatically increased his profile and increased his profile specifically on visibility on issues that he cares a lot about. So honestly, it's probably, that's most people get into this business, the independent run business, specifically to do that. You look at a guy like Cornel West. I mean, Cornel West, at this point, he switched from Peoples to Green, and now he's independent, like RFK Jr. The reason is that Cornel West cares deeply about ending the war in Ukraine and about some racial justice issues, which he uses his platform and his campaign to highlight. So from that point, I honestly do think it is a success, really, on both of their parts. They're also, though, media really highlighting some of his siblings that we have here. Let's put this up there on the screen. They long have differed very much from RFK Jr. Some of his literal own siblings said, Bobby might share the same name as our father, but he does not share the same values, vision, or judgment. Today's announcement is saddening for us. We denounce his candidacy. We believe it to be perilous for our country. Not the first time that they have done something like that.
This is very difficult for them to do, though. You know, to go against their own brother in such a public way, like, I think that's a very difficult thing for them to be able to come out and do.
My sister could do anything. It's not going to happen. And I would hope vice versa. I don't know. I think that's like a horrific and tremendous betrayal, personally. But however, they could do what they want. It's a complicated family. Who knows how close that they all are. This is irrespective of his own views or whatever.
Yeah.
I do think it is interesting that CPAC is still scheduled to have him speak. Let's put this up there on the screen. They announced that RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, and quote, other key influencers will speak at the CPAC Investor Summit. Here's what Matt Schlapp specifically had to say. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a unique voice in advocating for the defunding of the weaponized bureaucracy, ensuring the constitutional right of medical freedom. Kennedy has joined such an important event in a reflection of the splintering left-wing coalition that has gone full woke Marxist to the point that traditional liberals don't feel welcome anymore. The breakup of the left-wing coalition is occurring while the conservative coalition has the hopes of adding more blacks and Hispanics who reject gender insanity, the effects of the terrible economy, and the destruction of their once safer neighborhoods, Matt Schlapp, chairman of CPAC, stated. Now, the reason why I think that is so fascinating is that CPAC wants to have him on. And honestly, they even announced it ahead of his independent run.
Yeah.
But the RNC is like, no, he's a traditional liberal. And I said last time around that I specifically saw one MAGA influencer was like, very honest. He was like, I elevated RFK Jr. because he was a useful cudgel against Biden. But now I think he's going to take more votes away from Trump. So I'm going to start elevating all the terrible, like, liberal beliefs that the guy has. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of honest. So I think that's the phase that we're in now.
Oh.
Republicans are going to, at least
Very
like,
clearly.
Republicans who care about the election are about to turn hardcore on RFK Jr.
Yeah, it feels like this CPAC description and invitation and whatever is from like a month ago.
I was thinking the same
Like,
thing.
I think if this event was happening a month in the future and invites had been sent out, you know, a month from now, I don't think he would be on the list. They certainly would not be like highlighting him and propping him up in this particular way, because CPAC is very closely associated with like just the mainstream of the Republican Party. And Matt Schlapp has been a big Trump booster and all of that stuff. So yeah, this feels like it's a little bit out of date. And I even saw in the post on Twitter underneath of this, all of the replies were like, he's just a liberal and he voted for Hillary and blah, blah, blah. So already the message has gone out and the view of RFK Jr. among the Republican base has really shifted, which begs an important question, which is, you know, Donald Trump in particular has so much sway with the Republican base that now that he's very clearly turning on RFK, and we have a piece here, the one from Semaphore, guys. This is D6. Go ahead and put D6 up on the screen. They have a report that says Team Trump readies attacks on RFK Jr. And I think we've got a quote here too that is pretty explicit how they're going to go about this. They say, we're going to be dropping napalm after napalm on his head, reminding the public of his very liberal views dating back to 2012. We have a lot of stuff on him. So that's how Trump world is thinking about this. And I just have to think that the view of him among Republicans is set to totally flip because, you know, Tucker Carlson really liked him. Steve Bannon really liked him. He went on all of these like right-leaning or right-coded podcasts and talked about the issues where they had a lot of agreement and didn't talk about any of the issues where either now or in the past he might have some disagreement. So I wonder if that's going to change how he's viewed among the electorate and who he's going to actually perform well with in terms of a general election. So this is why I've always been skeptical of the certainty that he would take more votes away from Trump than away from Biden, because for one thing, Trump support is way more locked in. Biden support is way more squishy. For another thing, he's a Kennedy. The name is just really automatically associated with the Democratic Party. And for the last thing, Republicans are great when they decide to like rip someone apart and, you know, brand them as a traitor and someone who's anathema to their base. And that's the process that he's entered right now. So, so in any case, it's still not clear to me how the Kennedy vote will shake down. And I saw a poll that recently had him in there in like a three-way. He's getting a significant percentage of the vote. But in terms of when people actually go to the ballot box, it usually ends up being a lot less significant than what they're telling pollsters in advance.
Yes, that's a great point. Some of the attacks that they're writing are very funny. Quote, we are going to be dropping napalm after napalm on his head, reminding the public of his liberal views dating back to 2012. Quote, we have a lot of stuff on him. They previewed one Daily Caller story that was just published. It says, RFK Jr. once said farmers were worse than bin Laden months after 9/11. To be clear, he was I'm gonna
guess that's out of context.
Factory meat integrators are more threatening to democracy than Osama bin Laden. He's a long time in.
I mean, the Hillary.
Personally, I would not have said it.
The Hillary vote is a tough one.
Oh, Hillary's. Yeah,
the Hillary
that's the headshot.
Endorsement and vote is a tough one, and you know, if you get that out widely to the Republican base and people who are like right-leaning, how do you think they're going to feel
also
about
on
him?
Trump? I mean, even on our show, I'd have to go back and to watch the clip. But I remember we asked him about Trump, and he's like, "No, I disagree with Trump on plenty of things." You're not allowed to say that.
Trump guy.
Yeah, you're not allowed to say that whenever you are somebody who's supposed to be appealing to Republicans. That said, you know, look, there's maybe an independent-ish group of people that are out there that may vote for him. So I don't know. I mean, I think about, so Oliver Anthony, I feel like that discourse is just so many lifetimes ago. But I listened to his podcast with Joe Rogan because I was like, I want to hear about this guy and what he has to say. And he was like, well, you know, Trump did a lot of bad things too, like Operation Warp Speed. And I was like, oh, interesting. So you got Oliver Anthony here. By his own admission, he's not a two-party guy or whatever. But his only criticism main criticism he got right now of Trump, it was about Operation Warp Speed, the vaccine program.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, maybe there's people like him who will vote for RFK Jr. You know, there's a decent percentage of people who are like that in
And those
the
are
country.
people who would probably, if push came to shove,
Yes.
they would vote for Trump if it was just Trump v. Biden.
So then I'm like, okay, then I definitely do see the Trump spoiler, quote unquote, element to all of this, and a very legitimate constituency. I don't know how big the constituency would be, maybe 6-7% or whatever of the country, but that's not nothing. I mean, Ross Perot was able to get 20. The question too comes to RFK Jr.'s strategy. Perot was able to get a huge chunk of the vote because he said a ton of money, and he was able to buy big spots. And media was also different at that time with the monoculture, so a lot of people were forced to watch it. So I'd be curious to see how he gets his actual message out there from now.
Yeah.
For now, it's been podcasting. I think that was actually successful to get him to the point where he is, but I do think he's got to take it to another level. I don't know what that looks like though.
I mean, I do think the core, I listened to some of his speech, read some of the transcript of his speech. The core of his primary message is very popular.
Oh, of
it's
course.
anti-corruption.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's anti-Biden, it's anti-Trump, it's anti the two parties. And that is very, like, if you look at the polls, it's very popular. There is a historic number of people who are interested in a third party, who are disgusted with the two choices that are on the ballot. And, do I think that there's enough of an opportunity that RFK Jr. would be the next president? No, I don't think that. But if he's able to overcome some of the logistical hurdles, do I think that he has an opportunity to grab some portion of the electorate, some non-significant, some not insignificant portion of the electorate? Yeah, I absolutely do, because I think the fact that you have him, you have Cornel West, you may have this like no labels corporate candidate who's like, neither one is slavish enough to Wall Street out there as well. I think these are all signs of just the level of dissatisfaction that you have in the population about, really, Trump versus Biden again? Really? Like, I don't want either of these dudes. Give me something else. And so while the, electoral landscape still is what it is in terms of first past the post and no ranked choice voting and the structural barriers to get on the ballot, I mean, those are all still probably insurmountable obstacles to any viable third-party candidate. The fact that you have so many candidates who are well-known and have some funding behind them jumping into this thing, I do think is a real sign of just how disgusted Americans are with their total lack of real democratic choice, either on the Republican or the Democratic side.
I think you're very right, Krystal.
All right, let's talk about a presidential contender would-be. Somebody's licking his chops to get in whenever Biden is done. That would be Gavin Newsom. Kyle has coined the term greasy Gavin, which I think is actually
I don't mind it.
Not too shabby.
I will allow it.
Yes, not too shabby. And part of why it fits is because very hard to pin down what this dude actually thinks or believes outside of his very clear belief in his own abilities and ambition. He just issued a slew of vetos that are really quite something. Let me go through all of them and we can talk about them on the other side. This is not even all of them. There are a number of others, but these were some of the ones that stuck out to me. So put this up on the screen. You have this is a Democratic legislator, Alex Lee, who says he's extremely disappointed that the governor had vetoed a social housing act that would have built more social housing in certain specified areas in California. Of course, California is a state with a maybe the worst housing crisis in the entire country in terms of affordability. Yeah. Go ahead and put this next one up on the screen. This one might be a surprise to a lot of folks. California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill that would have decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms. And this is, similar legislation was actually passed here in D.C., passed in Oregon, passed in a number of places. This is sort of the next front after marijuana legalization is legalizing psychedelics and also enabling research on psychedelics. There's a lot of evidence at this point that it can be beneficial for treatment. A lot of veterans have found a lot of comfort and ability to overcome PTSD using psychedelic mushrooms and other psychedelics. So vetoed that. We also have put this next one up on the screen. Vetoed a bill to make free condoms available for high school students, citing cost. Would have been a few $1 million. California is facing a significant budget deficit, so that's why he's saying no free condoms for high school students. And then this last one that this one we talked about before. Yeah. This was significant in terms of being anti-labor. Vetoed a bill that would ban driverless big rigs. Labor very upset over this one. Silicon Valley very happy over this one. He had also vetoed that bill that would have provided unemployment insurance payments for striking workers. Hollywood very happy with him, and Hollywood donors very happy with him over that particular veto. And then the last one we have here is he vetoed a bill aimed at limiting the price of insulin. It would have capped insulin copays at $35 a month, I believe that it was. Now he has taken, and this is part of what's so perplexing, he has taken some significant steps towards curbing insulin costs. They're actually spinning up a public insulin program in the state of California where they are actually going to manufacture insulin at low cost and compete directly with pharma in terms of insulin. So it's not like he's done nothing here. But Saagar, when I look at all of these things and when I try to piece together, like, what is the overarching philosophy here, it really becomes very clear. It's follow the money. You know, if it goes against, we've seen him before, he really stymied this Medicare for All push, which was something he had pretended like he was in favor of. Well, guess what? The health insurers didn't like it, and so he had their back. They don't like this insulin thing. He has their back again. You know, on the labor stuff, very clear. So the two biggest donor sets in California and really for the Democratic Party overall are Silicon Valley and Hollywood. So he's not going to get crosswise of them with regards to labor. The condom one, who knows? I can't get inside of his head on that one.
Just like, okay.
But with even with psychedelics, you might think that one, like, what's going on there?
I actually was curious about that one. I didn't know more.
You know what? This won't surprise you. Like,
yeah.
PHARMA is not in favor of psychedelic legalization.
Oh, because they want to control
because they want
prescription.
they want you to be on anti-anxiety, antidepressants for the rest of your life. And with psychedelics, according to the early research which has been conducted, you don't take it forever. You have, you know, a few doses supervised, et cetera, in a certain fashion, and then you actually may have a chance at real recovery, not being on a pill for the rest of your life. That's not very profitable. So there's a big pharma angle here in terms of the hallucinogens.
That is extraordinarily dark. I'd heard it before, but this may be the most, you know, stunning example of that. I just think all of this, he's running for president. There's just no question. I think he's getting himself and gearing up for, you know, the black swan scenario should something happen to Biden or Biden drop out or something like that at the last minute. Very unlikely, to be clear, but he's gearing up. And then he's just going to mount a campaign like this over the next 4 years. His Sean Hannity play, incredibly smart. I thought it was one of the smartest things that he's done so far because it shows he can go into enemy territory. Democrats love that. You know, like boomer Democratic voters like, Gavin's giving it back to Sean.
Yeah.
And then he's got the centrist donor play. He's the governor of the most populous state. Look, I hate to say it. I think his power levels are like the highest they've ever been. Despite COVID, despite so many awful things that the man has done. But the centrist push on crime, on homelessness, combined with donor, combined with he breathes, he can speak, he's not unpopular like Kamala Harris. This was a serious contender. Absolutely serious contender.
You can see very clearly the lane that he wants to occupy. It's kind of the Pete Buttigieg lane. It's like, I'm going to be a donor darling. I'm going to have all the money in the world. Tech money, Silicon Valley money, tech money and Silicon Valley money are the same thing. Hollywood money, all the money in the Democratic Party. I'm going to make sure those donors absolutely love me. And I'm going to be this like resistance darling because, and this is what Pete always did, I'm going to go on Fox News, I'm going to mix it up. I have endless confidence in my ability to joust with Ron DeSantis or Sean Hannity or whoever you put in front of me. And they both are very like verbally skilled in those arenas. I don't think there's any denying it. And so I'm going to have the vibes of being this like fierce resistance fighter while having this very like status quo, donor friendly, traditional approach. Listen, I hate it, but a lot of Democratic voters have really found it compelling. The media absolutely eats it up. And so, you know, I hate to say it, but I do think it's a like savvy play in terms of how he's positioning himself, likely for 2028. But if something crazy happened, 2024.
That's the thing. People are like, oh, are you saying you like Gavin? I'm not saying that at all. I don't like Gavin Newsom. I can't stand Gavin Newsom. But as you said, Krystal, I understand the electorate. This is, you got to put on your analysis hat and look at candidates who are successful. And the median voter, the median Democratic voter in this country is a 55-year-old white guy with no college degree.
Yeah.
those people love Gavin. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, you got to understand their media consumption, where they're coming from, what they actually get animated by when it comes to politics. Like, your Thanksgiving table is a far better barometer of what actual voters and people think about politics and the type of people who they engage with on that level. And for that, Gavin is absolutely the best positioned out of any person in the field for that category.
Well, here's the other thing, is he's done enough on the, like, these are all betrayals of progressives, obviously, and of labor and love veterans and all kinds of people, but he's done enough on the other side of a coin to, when he wants to, talk like he's a progressive.
Good point. $20 wage.
Yeah, he signed a bill that gave all fast food workers at large chains $20 an hour in the state of California. And, you know, they have really, I think California may have the lowest uninsured rate in the country now. So it's not like he's made no progress in terms of health insurance coverage. The insulin play is another example here. The push towards electric vehicles, another example. So there are things that are real that he can point to when he wants to position himself as a progressive, but when it comes down to like key concerns for his base of donors, he's never going to get crosswise with them.
Good point, Krystal.
All right, so we've got another big story that just broke yesterday, which is that, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. Joe Biden, it appears, has just been interviewed by Special Counsel Robert Hur over that classified documents probe. This happened over the course of 2 days. Here's the statement from the White House counsel's office. Spokesperson Ian Sams, the president, has been interviewed as part of the investigation being led by Special Counsel Robert Hur. The voluntary interview was conducted at the White House over 2 days, Sunday and Monday, and concluded Monday. As we have said from the beginning, President and White House are cooperating with the investigation as it has been appropriate. We've provided relevant updates publicly, blah, blah, blah. We'd refer other questions to the Justice Department at this time. So as a reminder, you guys probably know there were a bunch of classified documents after the whole Trump, FBI, Mar-a-Lago raid, et cetera. Then they found or revealed that they had found a bunch of classified documents in Joe Biden's home, in particular in his garage. I think also at an office that he had here in D.C. as part of one of his like think tank centers that he put his name on. And quite a number of documents. We don't know a whole lot about what they contained. One thing that, you know, they would point to, and I think is accurate, that's different, is there doesn't appear to have been the level of obstruction in trying to hide these documents and fighting with the, with the folks who were trying to bring them back when they were subpoenaed, as in the Trump instance. However, this is obviously not great for him. And a reminder that, you know, this is an ongoing investigation. And listen, if we care about how classified documents are handled, then you got to care about them, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican who is mishandling them.
It also, you know, this should be a bit of a scandal because there was a lot of questions. They're like, where the hell is Biden? What is he doing? Nobody knows where the hell he has been over the last 2 days. You know, during the Israel
That's like
thing,
typical though.
It is typical, but it was even more, you know, than normal. Like, for example, on the day of the attack on Israel, they were having like a White House barbecue, which was the only publicly scheduled thing. All they did was put out written statements. He appeared on camera then later on the next day. Yesterday, the White House had no publicly scheduled events. And then the statement drops in the middle of the night, of course, during a major international crisis where the president sat for almost 2 whole days with this investigator. So clearly they're trying to bury it. And I think you've got very convenient timing in terms of what's going on with Israel, because it is a reminder that it turns out that all of these guys think they are above the law. They really believe that the classified documents are theirs. It's like a height of narcissism. And I don't particularly care because a lot of these are probably out of date or all of that. It's just more the idea, like in one case with the Biden docs, they're stored in his garage where he keeps his Corvette, which is why they're safe. But just to give you an idea of how personal he thought, they were intermingled with files that described like his son's funeral, right? It's like that's the level of how personal that they felt that these documents were theirs, and they're not. It just shows the staff and them and how they really believe that they can do whatever they want. There are so many things in which the president, the vice president, some of these people, they really believe that they're kings.
Yeah, because remember the Mike Pence, we found out like, oh,
Mike Pence, the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's and it turns out Jimmy Carter did the same thing. You know, and it's just so many of these people.
Hillary.
Oh, well, the Hillary one. Look, it's been a long time, but that one is so much worse than anyone else. And gets to the whole, like, I'm special, I'm the most important person on
I
earth.
think she should have been charged. I don't think hers is worse than Trump, though, just in terms of the level of classification that he held. And now the reports that he was, like, you know, blabbing to us, trying to sell, like, what was it, missile systems to Australia and blabbing about secret
there's some
nuclear
questions about
information.
that one, Krystal. The whole Australian billionaire thing. That I'm not going to say it's been totally debunked, but some of the reporting questions around that have arisen. I'm just saying, in terms of that, I'm not denying. I agree with you. He had bad classified information. He didn't
He had
do it while he was
very
president,
highly
though.
classified information. And then when they were like, you need to give this back, he was like, what information? And then he's secretly, allegedly, blah, blah, blah. He's telling his staff and his maintenance workers to move boxes around to hide the stuff. we're talking about, like, you know, not the type of thing that is like bullshit classified, which much of classified information is bullshit classified. We're talking about stuff that is like, okay, if you're gonna have anything be secret, this should be probably secret. So I do think his is an order of magnitude different than the other
She was Secretary of
situations.
State. Don't forget about the bleach.
Yeah, but there was nothing like that was that we know of. That's fair, that we know. Listen, again, I think she should have been charged as well. So I'm in favor of indictments all around. That's my stated position.
There you go. All right.
Okay, so next piece we wanted to bring you here is there's an interesting rift that has been revealed or exacerbated or underscored by what's going on with Israel and Gaza right now within the Democratic Party. And yesterday we talked to you about the numbers in terms of Gallup and how much there has been a shift within the Democratic base that is reflected by a few Democratic members of Congress in terms of who their sympathies were taking this particular situation out of it, with whom their sympathies lie more in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. You now have a majority of Democrats who say their sympathies are more with the Palestinians than they are with Israel. That is a dramatic shift over the past decade or so. It's a new development. I think it's led largely by young people who have a very different view of this conflict than their parents do, even, you know, Democratic parents. As I said, it's reflected in a few of the younger squad members who have been elected, Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and others at various moments, depending on how they're feeling. And so you have also had this schism really open up over on the Democratic Party's party organ media, which is MSNBC. So you had the head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, go on Morning Joe and really blast the network's coverage of this current Israel-Gaza conflict in quite unsparing terms. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
So while I am sad and trying to cope, I'll be honest, I am angry. I am angry with the world that allowed the dehumanization of Israelis and sanitized the terrorism of Hamas. I must say, I love this show and I love this network, but I've got to ask, who is writing the scripts? Hamas, the people who did this, they are not fighters, Jonathan. They are not militants, and I'm looking right at the camera. They are terrorists. It is a barbarian who rapes and brutalizes women, who kills children in front of their parents, and then brings them over to Gaza, who literally, we've heard all these reports, and we know these aren't just reports. These were filmed gleefully by the barbarians who committed these grotesque crimes. So I just think, like, guys, get this story right. And all these pictures of, like, you know, missiles or the rubble in Gaza, please talk to the Israeli mothers and fathers who lost their children. Talk to the grandchildren whose grandparents were seized as hostages. And please stop calling this a retaliation.
So there's a lot I could say about that. I'm going to hold off for a moment because based on his commentary, you would think that MSNBC was like, go Hamas.
Yes.
Right? Yay for the murdered Israelis. That there was no, you know, no images of the Israeli bloodshed, no compassion for the Israeli citizens. And what he's really alluding to here, even though he doesn't come out and name names, is three anchors in particular. Ayman Mohyeldin, Mehdi Hassan, and Ali Velshi, all of which have international backgrounds, many of whom have covered this conflict on the ground for a long time or have roots directly in the region. So I want to play for you a little bit of the commentary that he's reacting to show you, I think, the distance between how he's portraying it as being like Hamas talking points versus how they were actually speaking about the conflict. Let's take a listen to a little of that.
When we talk about Gaza in the West, for a lot of people, it's very easy to conflate Hamas, which is a militant group that carries out acts of vicious terror, as they did this weekend, with Gaza, which is a place that contains 2.2 million people, Alex, half of them children. Half of the 2.2 million people are children, and it's one of the most densely populated places on planet Earth. You've got 2.2 million people crowded into 141 square miles. So they automatically become the victims of Israeli airstrikes because it's so crowded, because it's so densely populated. And it's basically like living, Alex, in an open-air prison.
Recognition of anything that has been going on, let alone, the only thing Americans are worried about these days are these so-called judicial reforms going on in Israel, which have led to hundreds of thousands of people protesting on the streets. But lots of Palestinians have said to me, boy, they wish that those same Israelis who were out there protesting the so-called judicial reforms would be protesting Israel's inhumane treatment of the Palestinians who live under Israeli occupation. But
what is the objective of Israel invading the Gaza Strip, right? Because I emphasize this point for those of us who have been following this conflict for years. Israel has already assassinated and killed the most senior Hamas militant officials. They have killed the spiritual leader of Hamas. They have arrested dozens of Hamas.
They can achieve that. They
can achieve that. They have achieved that. They've done that. Yeah. They've done that. And my point is, what you're going to see certainly within Israel's security apparatus is a debate. Whether that is public or transparent is not going to be as clear-cut. But Israeli military officials that I've spoken to over the years have debated whether or not the siege, the blockade, was achieving Israel's strategic objective of trying to bring calm and quiet to the southern borders.
Every one of those individuals have acknowledged, and Mehdi, I've listened to a lot of his commentary. He's very clear that what Hamas did is an atrocity, it's a war crime. He's just also trying to acknowledge the war crimes that Israel's committing and the broader context, as we've tried to do very carefully here as well. And so when I hear the ADL dude talking about how, you know, where did this dehumanization of Israelis come from? It doesn't seem to me that Israelis are being dehumanized. It seems to me what he's upset about is Palestinians being humanized. And so when he said, quote, get the story right. And he was very upset about images of rubble in Gaza. Well, how are you going to tell the accurate story if you're not showing the images of the rubble in Gaza, as you were, of course, also highlighting and acknowledging and empathizing with the pain, suffering, death, and carnage that was inflicted on the Israeli citizens?
It's funny, Krystal, I get a lot of messages. People are like, when are you going to speak up for Israel? And I'm like, I didn't know that I had to. I'm a citizen of the United States. I feel very bad and horrible. I've been to Israel, spent a lot of time there. I have friends in the IDF. I have nothing but sympathy for so many of the people who were killed there. But as I said on yesterday's show, I also have a lot of good friends who are Palestinian. And so I actually consider it a blessing that I know people who are actually on both sides. Some of these people hate each other. They've never even met before. But my life has taken me around the world. And I've just learned through a lot of these conflicts, black and white thinking will get you nowhere. Saying, oh, you have to just unequivocally, back one side. I don't operate that way. Not with Russia and Ukraine. Not even when it's unpopular. You don't operate that way either.
Yeah.
That's just not what we do here. And unfortunately, a lot of our media, that's how they want to portray everything. Right. And listen, you are being used if you want that, because I'm watching all of this march towards, the U.S. has got to back up. The U.S. Carrier Strike Group has got to get involved in Gaza. That is a nightmare. Now we're going to get into a war with Iran. There are millions of people who live in Iran. I lost people in the war in Iraq. Known people who died in so many of these conflicts. This is the last thing that we need. And the scars of Iraq on media, that's why I'm in this job today. I don't subscribe to black and white narratives, and neither do you, because I think both of us are sitting here very much for that reason of watching people get killed, slaughtered, lose limbs, and all that, ultimately really for nothing. Yeah. And it's very difficult, to sit and to watch like the same beat and the war drum happen when we don't have to be that way. So we will never cover conflict that way. And that's effectively what Jonathan Greenblatt is
100%. I mean, to me, the most revealing thing that he said is get the story right.
Yeah, it's like, what?
And I think it really, and he's mad about, oh, how dare you show the suffering in Gaza? How dare you talk about anything else that's going on except for the things I want you to talk about? Because he wants this to be as Disneyfied a narrative as the Russia-Ukraine narrative is. Yeah, and that's what cable news does.
Yeah.
I mean, even putting aside the
good at.
Extreme and understandable emotion around blood, death, war, carnage, etc. I mean, this is what they do with Democrats and Republicans. This is the good guys. This is the bad guys. Let me give you the Disney version of American politics. That's all they know how to do. That's all their formats are set up to do. And so the fact that you have a few voices who happen on this particular issue to have personal experience, have reported on it for a long time. You know, if you listen to what Eamon said, it was very thoughtful. He clearly has deep knowledge about the history in the region, compassion on both sides of the issue, no doubt about it. And it's a war on any kind of nuance. No, you are not allowed. You can only choose one side to reflect their humanity. That's it. And so I do think, even as the media is still overwhelmingly one-sided on this issue, the fact that you have any sort of nuance in the New York Times, any sort of nuance, CNN had a few interviews that were, you know, with actual Palestinian voices, that you have a few anchors on MSNBC who are able to articulate a different view, they see this as a real threat to, you know, the lock hold that they've had, bipartisan lock that they've had on American politics for, you know, for years and years and years and years and years.
Yeah, and I just, you know, it's like thinking about how he's like, get the story right and all of that. That is pure propaganda. All of us have, and what's crazy to me is some of the people who are buying into this are the exact ones who are screaming about, oh, we're being propagandized about Ukraine. It's like, what,
True.
You think it's only about Ukraine? It's about everything, people. That's why you got to actually wake up and be asked, like, what you're being used and propagandized towards.
They
It's
want the
same
Disney
thing.
version on this one.
Yeah, Iraq was not Disney, and we all found that out the hard way. Ukraine's not Disney either. We're finding that out the hard way right now. Afghanistan wasn't Disney. You know, it wasn't just all about liberating girls' schools. It wasn't so simple, and it wasn't so easy. It's like, I don't know, Syria, same one. It's like, yeah, we watched the horror of Aleppo, and then we found out that the guys fighting on the other side are freaking Al-Qaeda. It's like, what do you do? That's what an actual conflict is, and until you understand that, then you're really not going to get anywhere. But, you know, in some ways, it's actually helpful because it just means that only places like us who can't get muzzled for saying what we actually think are going to be able to prosper and survive in this. However, I do think it's unfortunate, you know, that people take margin. He's such a partisan cretin too, because this is all based on his ideology of censorship, of what he was doing with Twitter, about, you know, leveraging and making sure that any criticism of Israel in the past is conflated directly with anti-Semitism, using his organization effectively as an enforcer for like the, you know, like liberal elite in the country, and that's why they do it. They do it for this reason, because it works. Because you know this, the sting of that criticism being felt high up, you know, within MSNBC, you know it's going to have an impact. You'd be lying. These people, Mehdi and Eamon and all these people, they would be lying if they said that wouldn't have an impact on the way. They have to think about that when they go on the air.
It's human. Even if, I would not be surprised.
I'm not saying they will do anything
I have
wrong.
no inside knowledge to what sort of discussions have happened at MSNBC. Let me make that clear. Would I be surprised if there was a direct talking to? No. But does there even have to be a direct talking to?
No.
Absolutely not. You think they didn't see that segment? Of course they saw that segment. And they know that there is a lot of pressure to conform. They know the things they're supposed to say. They know the things that they're supposed to highlight. And it's very difficult if you're in an organization over time not to at least capitulate to that in some respect. So respect to them for, you know, daring to say that Gazans also are human beings, and that, you know, this conflict didn't just start 4 days ago, that there's a broader context that doesn't justify murder of Israeli citizens. Literally no one on MSNBC is saying that at all. I have not seen that whatsoever. They're not justifying Israeli death. But if you want to actually understand, help viewers understand what's happening here, you have to give the history. You have to help people understand where Hamas came from and how they gained power and why they're in this position to start with. And the way that Netanyahu, as we talked to today, found them to be a useful foil and bolstered them, and how the U.S. was also complicit in helping to bring them to power, and all of that, and understanding that, you know, the lives of people within Gaza. If you're going to tell a complete story, you got to tell a complete story, not quote unquote get the story right as approved by the ADL.
Well, there you go. I guess we can all agree at least the ADL is bad for a long time.
It's my Disney version.
Thank you for, yeah, that's my Disney version. Thank you for sticking with us. We really appreciate it. It was a tough show. We try our best. We stacked it. We had a lot of important Israel developments. We also had a lot of important domestic developments. We'll see and continue to track everything. We got counterpoints for everybody tomorrow. If anything breaking happens in the meantime, you can probably expect something. We will remain on it. Our crew and everybody's been working around the clock. Thank you to everybody who has been supporting us, and we will see you all on Thursday.
See you guys Thursday.